You ever have a moment where something just clicks and you realize you're not here to play small? That's the energy we're bringing this season. Welcome to Taboo Talks with Krystal, where we get honest about the messy middle of healing, rising, and rewriting the rules. This isn't just about surviving what you've been through, it's about reclaiming what's always been yours. Each week, we dive into real conversations around healing, leadership, identity, and choosing to live on your own terms. No filters, no performance positivity, just truth, tools, and a whole lot of permission to take up space. Whether it's just you and me today, or I'm joined by a guest who's been through the fire and found purpose on the other side, you're in the right place. Ginger, thank you so much for joining us today. You have a very powerful story, and I know it's going to resonate with my listeners. So, could you just share a little bit about your journey growing up and how your early experiences have shaped the path that you're on today?
Certainly. Thank you very much for having me on, Krystal. I appreciate it. So, I grew up in Akron, Ohio. My mom and dad got divorced when I was around 5, and I want to say around 8 is probably when the abuse started to happen. I grew up in a very tumultuous home because of the way that my mom was. Later on in life, I learned that she had been diagnosed at some point as schizophrenic. And I can attest to that the things that we thought were her mood swings as a kid were actually her changing personalities. And I know that through some of the stuff that she would tell me when I was a kid, that she had been abused and mistreated in her own home. Her mother actually came over from France after World War II and left her and her sister out in the cold when they were like little, and just up and left one day. And a neighbor came over, realized that the kids were out, took them in, and then when their dad came home, was like, "Hey, here's your kids." My mom didn't talk a lot about her childhood, but those were a couple of the things that she did mention. But a lot of it was just, I felt like very isolated. I never wanted anyone to know. I was very ashamed of the physical abuse, the mental abuse, everything that was going on in my home. On top of being poor, she joined a church, and that church had happened to have a Christian school located nearby. And because we were poor, they paid for it. So I did go to private school, which I kind of hate telling people because it has a connotation like you're automatically rich, but we weren't. The church paid for it. Um, and of course,
Totally. 100%. I went to Catholic school and it was 100% based on I was there on scholarship or I wouldn't be
yeah,
there.
right. So, I was ashamed of that because I didn't feel like any of my classmates or anything were particularly poor. Um, and then just carrying that shame of like, my mom treating me the way she did and yelling at me, things like, I was 8 and she was calling me a bitch and telling me she wished I'd never been born. And I started keeping a journal about 10 or 11 years of age that I kept for a long time. And I journal all of those things because I didn't have anyone else really to talk to that I felt comfortable talking to. And that included my grandparents, um, and of course, people at school. So I just kind of held all that in and just journaled through it. And, ultimately, of course, I was suicidal a couple of times as a kid and documented that. Um, my attempts were not serious, but I sat there and contemplated and literally held a razor blade in my hand. So it was bad enough. There was one time that she had beaten me and left bruises from, basically my lower waist down to the backs of my knees. And So that was the kind of thing that I was dealing with on top of um, mind games. She would tell us, my brother and I, that my dad was going to come see us. And we'd sit by the window all day waiting for him to show up, and then he wouldn't. And then she would be like, see, I'm the only one you can depend on. And going back through that later as an adult, I really think she was just saying it. I don't think he was going to come because he had lived in Florida for several years. And so he wasn't even in the state, and we just didn't know because she didn't tell us. And I think that
I
was
am
her
like
mental.
blown away right now at how parallel our stories are.
Oh, wow.
I literally would sit by the window and wait for my mom to show up for visitation when she had called ahead and said she wasn't coming because she had, you know, for whatever reason. And they knew that. And we would say, oh my God, like
Yeah, and
mind
that's
blown.
that's a really crappy mind game to play on your kids. But it was totally
So
her.
bad.
It
I
was
so
totally
get where you're
her
coming from.
just trying to be like, see, I'm the only one you can depend on.
Yep.
So we felt like we couldn't tell anybody else because she was
Yep.
all we had. Um, and, that leaves you in that isolated feeling. And, plus on top of, I retreated into books. I read books all the time. I sat on the couch because I felt like if I make myself small, I'm not going to do whatever it is that triggers her, because you didn't know. And so I would read all the time and, kind of just drift away into the book. And that was my life, was being in those books. And that was the life I wanted. So I very carefully curated who I wanted to look like on the outside and how I acted at school, how I acted with my teachers and things like that, because school was the only place I really felt mostly accepted. I mean, I had issues because kids are kids, but mostly with my teachers because I had the whole, oh, you seem so mature for your age. Well, thanks. That's because I'm, having to parent my parent basically and grow up myself. Um, but so I related to a lot of my teachers, and, I can credit some of them for really being there for me and kind of because I had a little more access because of the Christian school and they would come to church and stuff and I'd see them outside of school hours too. I was able to have a little more connection and I think that helped be like a lifeline. I also had a very dear neighbor who, when I was old enough to start babysitting, um, my mom would take the money that I earned and she asked me one time, she goes, what, are you saving your money or did you buy something fun with your money? And I was like, well, no, my mom took it. And so she said, oh, well, here's what we'll do. I'll tell your mom I'm paying you this amount, but I'll pay you double so that you can keep that other side. So that was something that was, very, very kind and generous of her. I can only imagine that my neighbors had to suspect something because when my mom got mad, she was very loud. you know.
Right.
So
Right.
I'm sure that they had to realize that there was something going on. But it was the 80s, and people just kind of stuck to themselves and didn't insert themselves into anybody's business. But it does have an isolating effect. I usually had like one friend in the different grades that I was close to. I had a friend who lived down the block from me who also was dealing, with her own issues with her mom, um, neglect and depression and things like that. So I think that's one way that she and I kind of bonded, even though we never really talked as kids about those issues. We did talk about them as adults. Um, but for me, I think the biggest thing was just the isolation of it all. And then I should probably go back to the multiple personality disorder. So she had pulled up on my lawn one night because she was fighting with her boyfriend. And this was a little while after her mother had passed, and she had inherited some money and she was just like blowing through it. But anyway, she pulled up on my lawn one night and she was like really like puffy and doughy and kind of shorter than she was. And she's whining about all this stuff. And I managed to push her into the car And we drive to a behavioral health center in downtown Akron. And I'm talking to her, and she's kind of still being whiny, like, I don't know why you're treating me like this, and blah, blah, blah. And I get her out of the car, and we get in the elevator, and I am not kidding you. Her stature changed, where she like was suddenly taller. Her face got less doughy and more pinched. Her voice changed from the whininess to, oh, Ginger, I don't know why you have brought me here and blah, blah, blah. To the point that when the medical provider saw her, they came out and said, why did you even bring her here? And I'm like, I am telling you the truth. This is what happened. This is what I observed. And just dealing with all of that, because it wasn't the first time we tried to get her help, it kind of makes you look like you're the one with the mental illness. And it's very hard to deal with that because she can straighten herself up so nobody else sees it. And obviously, that's a result of whatever protective mechanism she put in place, from her abuse. But it
Right.
was
It
at
almost feels
once,
like you're being gaslit.
right. It was at once like the most interesting and scary thing I'd ever seen because we're in the elevator and it's just us. And I'm just like watching her and I'm like, and it's like all coming back. And I'm like, so those weren't moods when we were kids. Those were probably very different, distinct personalities. And that's really kind of creepy when you think about it. Um, Eventually, she and I did cut ways, or, because I had had a son in my late 20s, and he was about 20 months old. And again, she was over at our house because she was having issues with her boyfriend. I think it was the same guy, too. And my son was just carrying over little toys for her to like play with him and get her interest because she wasn't around him very much by her choice. And one of the toys had slipped out of his hand and it was a little heavier because it was like a crib toy that he wasn't using anymore. And she reached down and she pushed him down onto his behind. He didn't cry. He was in a diaper. He just looked shocked. And I got up because right then, you're triggered into mama bear mode. I got up, moved him out of the way, screamed and cussed at her, smacked her, which I'd never done ever in my life, and told her that was it. She was getting out of my house. And my husband at the time was out running an errand or something. I called him and I'm like so mad, I'm shaking. And I'm like, you need to get home right now and go upstairs and make sure she packs and leaves. Because if I do it, I don't think she'll leave alive. Like I was that mad. Like all the years of the abuse that she heaped on me, and she's going to try and push down my son, who she hardly ever even sees. Like that was just it. And she did try to come back to my house like 3 days later, and she was her different mood, different personality. Oh, Ginger, I don't even know why you're so upset because you pushed my son down. Oh, it was just a little shove. I said, Mom, get off my property or I'm going to call the police. And I shut the door, and that was the last time I had seen her. She passed away in 2017. The medical examiner tracked down my brother first. My brother was always her favorite, so she had him as the contact and didn't have any information for me. But I ended up having to be the one to like go and identify her and deal with that and clean out her apartment. And I was upset, but I realized I wasn't upset that she had died. I was just upset that I was never ever able to have any kind of real relationship with her like a mom should have with her daughter. And that's what I mourned was that, I mean, conscientiously, literal, I knew it was never going to happen just because of all the other stuff that had happened and with pushing her out when Alex was little. But like there was that finality to it once she passed, that just was never ever going to be a thing that ever happened. And I was very, very upset about that for a little while. Um, we had her cremated. I hung on to her ashes. And I kept thinking about what to do with her ashes. In the meantime, I don't know if you're familiar with Jeanette McCurdy's book, I'm Glad My Mom Died. Have
I
you heard
think
of
so.
that? Okay.
Yes, I've heard
So
of
I
it.
actually read that. And, read about her issues with her mom and the way her mom would use her and abuse her. Um, and it felt oddly validating because, again, the abuse and all the shame that I had around it, even though I was the victim, again, was very isolating. And you didn't hear a lot of other stories. I mean, you'd hear like some Dateline or news stuff about, kids in cages or horrid, awful things occasionally here and there. But like people in your everyday life or people who are celebrities, you just assume they have these great lives. And so reading that book was in a way validating because it felt like I'm not alone. Not that I would wish any of this on anybody. I don't want anyone to think that. But just to know that, there are other people that do go through all that same crap, all that same mental anguish and shame, and they're the victim, and that's what needs to end is that we feel that instead of the abuser feeling that. And I think it was very important to have things like the Me Too movement and things like that because we did need to turn that around. We shouldn't feel ashamed for things, especially as children that we have no control over. I didn't need to grow up like that, and it really affected my trust levels with people in my adulthood. I did get a divorce finally, and I credit my son with giving me the strength to do that because I was in not a physically abusive marriage, but just a neglectful marriage. And it's like, yeah, I don't need this either. And thankfully, I'm now with somebody who's wonderful, and he's really the only other person other than like you and a handful of other people now that even know my story, because I didn't even trust my first husband to tell him. So, but yes,
Well, thank you. I want to pause you right there and thank you for opening up and for sharing your heart. As we're sitting here, I am literally walking through my childhood as you are sharing your story. And like I said, the parallels are uncanny. And oftentimes I question sharing my story. And that is at the root of what I'm doing today is helping other people share their story to step into their authenticity. And when you shared your story, it hit me as to why I do it because I'm sitting here in this chair listening to you and saying, "Oh my God, you're so right." Knowing that I did not have this experience only in my head, that somebody else went through it, normalizing it makes me feel a little bit more healed. So, thank you.
thank you. Yeah, definitely. My brother and I talked. We had been estranged for a separate reason, but after my mom died, we were able to talk and kind of share our perspectives. Because even though your siblings growing up in the same house, you still have like your perspective on how things went down, or and your memories, what you remember versus what the
Right.
other remembers. And that was also very healing because she did do a lot to like pit us against each other too. And we really kind of talked that out, which is, like I had mentioned, she was his favorite. He was her favorite. Um, and she was not shy about it. She'd like take things from me and be like, oh, this is your brother's now. And it's like, but that was mine. Um, Other things too, just always making sure she had money for his birthday gifts and didn't really ever have money for my birthday gifts. It's like, when my birthday is every year, you can save up for that. Just little things that do weigh on you as a kid. Plus, like I said, the names she'd call me, the things she'd say, um, and everything that I wrote in my diary. And I will share that when I was pregnant with my son, before I knew if I was having a boy or a girl, I had made a pledge to myself that no matter, I wanted a healthy child, no matter what gender they were, that child was going to know love without anything else every day. And to the extent that I actually went to my old journal and I ripped out all of those pages because I didn't want to carry that stuff into my, being a mom. And I ended up having a son, and every day, he's 22 now, he still lives at home. With house prices the way they are, I don't know if I'll ever move out. But anyway, but he knows every day that he is loved. I hug him. Like, I literally remember my mom hugging me maybe 3 times. And that's even being as a kid. Like, you didn't go to her for things. I was very self reliant. Some of that helps you as an adult, but there's better ways to gain self reliance than to be abused by your mom. So,
And that helps us, I feel, break those cycles. This is exactly how we do it. We have to be strong enough to be the ones to stand up and say, no, you are
yeah.
not going to pass this on. And that is exactly why I broke connection with my father years and years ago before I even had children, because that's where my head was. I knew what was going to happen. I watched it happen with my cousins.
Mm,
Like, I was not, it was not happening. So I absolutely believe that this is how we need to break those cycles, because not only do we learn from our own experience, but then we get to create what we lacked or what we wanted, or we know how to make it better moving forward. And that's so important.
definitely. Like, I did all the things, for my son. He had big birthday parties every year, and his birthday happens to be in December. So I always made sure that I didn't put the tree up till after his birthday because it was December 4. And, just always made sure that those things were separated. So we'd get all the same holidays and things that other kids did. Um, I hawked jewelry one year because I needed to get him gifts. I was also going back to school and getting my bachelor's degree at that point. Um, and thankfully, I ended up with my current husband. We've been together 15 years, so most of my son's
Mhm.
childhood. Um, and I got all the things I wanted. I got a house, and I got the dog, and I got my son, and I got my bonus son, and um, somebody who loves me unconditionally, which I still am. Sorry, still I'm sometimes in awe of, because for a long time I had convinced myself that I was unlovable, because if my own mom and dad didn't love me, why would anyone else? And that's what I grew up thinking and feeling about myself. And that's rough, and it does a number on your psyche into your adulthood, long into your adulthood. So,
It does. It does. Mm. One
but
of the key messages that you were talking about is that your past doesn't have to own you or even shape you, you said. Can you talk more about what that means for you and how you came to believe that we don't have to be defined by the things that have happened to us?
I think for me, it really came down to when I had my son, or actually when I got pregnant, knew I was pregnant. I knew that obviously I wasn't going to raise my son the way I had been raised, as far as, all the vitriol and abuse and meanness and everything like that. I just knew that wasn't going to be it at all. And just making that conscientious effort to be like, this, things are going to be different. These are the things that are going to be different. And for me, the biggest thing was just I needed my child to know every day that they were loved. They are loved. They are actively loved. They see it. They feel it. They know it. It's, in the way I tell them, in the way I, take them everywhere, in the way that I try to, encourage their interests and talk to them at the end of the day. I love it. Even now, my son will come and talk to me just to chat, talk about his work or whatever. And it is like the most fulfilling thing ever to know that I have that relationship with him, that he can come talk to me. You know, thing. when I knew I was pregnant, I knew I had to make that conscientious decision that the things that happened to me were not going to happen to my child. And, he gave me the strength to leave my husband, to admit that, this was not working and I was not required to stay in it by any means or anything, to go back to school and get a bachelor's degree. Um, and, just to keep moving forward because I had to make things good for him, and so that propelled me, in all the choices that I made because I knew I needed a degree to get a better job and blah 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 blah. And so, and I didn't want him in a household where the parents were always arguing and stuff because that's what it was like. Plus, his dad was very neglectful to him. I still don't understand all that, but and I think it was just, starting with knowing I was pregnant, I knew that things would be different. So, because I had to make them that way.
What would you say to somebody who is right now feeling trapped or feeling stuck in their past?
If they feel like they're stuck in their past or trapped, I would think I would advise them to take stock of what's around them. Where are they now? Are they in a safe situation? Are they in a situation that they still need to get out of? Are there people in their life that are contributing to them feeling that way? We there's been debate over the last few years, and I see it online too about, oh, should you cut people off and should you not? I'm for it because you have to look out for your mental health first and foremost. And yeah, it sucks that you have to cut off relationships with certain friends or even family. But if it protects your mental health and makes you a better, happier, healthier person, then that's what's worth it. You cannot keep negative people in your life that still kind of do the same traumatizing or abusive type things to you and expect to heal. It's not going to work. Cutting my mom out of my life was probably one of the, a major thing that helped me start on a better path to recognizing and kind of reevaluating my own life and choices and what I wanted and who I didn't want to be moving forward. But if she was still like there and looming, I'd probably still be stuck like having dumb little fights with her or whatever for a long time until she did pass. Or her like, having her stupid fights with her boyfriend and expecting to come over and stay at my house all the time. So um I think you need to look at where you're at. If you're in a good situation, you know, I know some people are against journaling, some people like to journal. I find it helpful because that was what I had to basically talk to. It always helps me to get things out on paper and kind of um, see it in black and white where I'm at. What do I want? Am I happy? What are the good things going on in my life? What are the bad things? Of the bad things, what can I change? That's the biggest thing. What can I change? And if I absolutely can't change it, like you can't change how a family member talks to you, most likely, you can address it. They're probably going to gaslight you. Eventually, you just cut them off. That's what you can change, and you make a new set of friends and a new community around you of different people who understand you and support you and aren't going to do the same negative abusive type things to you.
Absolutely. And in doing that, in starting to remove yourself from those old patterns, those old connections, that negativity, you start building something new in the process, right? So you have moved through several phases from medical assisting to running a nonprofit, and now, as you said, designing websites for authors. What led you to find your true passion? And how has building your business been part of your healing journey?
So, honestly, I started designing stuff. It started with a form after I graduated and got my medical assisting degree and was working in a little medical records copying company. We had this stupid, I don't know, time in and time out form or something. And I just hated the way it was designed. So I redesigned it. And then as I moved through other doctors' offices, and there was one I was at for about 10 years, I was doing medical billing for them. And we were there were a couple times where I did a couple like ads and I would try to come up with like different initiatives for different things we could do in the office. Like we got a couple toy medical kits so that because we were a family practice, so we saw all ages. Got some toy medical kits so that when little kids came in and saw the doctor, they could play with the tools and kind of get not be as nervous or as frightened or whatever, kind of calm them down and keep them occupied while they're having their visit. So things like that. And then as we got further along into the 90s and early 2000s, it's like, okay, we're going to have a website. This is the way the world is going. The yellow pages are going to go away, you know. And I wasn't designing sites then. I don't code. Um, but I did create like a document that was here's what needs to be on the homepage, and I wrote all the copy, and then here's what needs to be on this page, and all the copy, and what the links need to be. And I'll tell you right now, my motivating factor for this website was how can we reduce incoming calls to the office? That was really my goal. Because there were certain
Yeah.
like we had a separate line that we wanted people to call about their prescription refills and things like that. People would call and find, what insurance do you accept? Where are you located? Who are your doctors? All of that stuff could be on a website, and answered. And so I created this like 20-page document that was the basic map of this website. And it took me about 2 years to convince these doctors because they were old school doctors. They were like, oh, only bad doctors advertise, that kind of thing. But it took me about 2 years, and everybody that I would present the document to that I was negotiating about getting the design done were like, oh, well, you easily saved them like 2 grand just because you have this. Like, all we have to do is like design it and slap it in there. And then, trying to think when I was doing a little website for my son for his like pictures because I was super proud mommy. And I would take him. I literally took him to get pictures every month for like 2 years. It was ridiculous. Um, but I would share some of those pictures. And so that was probably my first like website, and then I was also doing like freelance brochures and flyers and sold a couple of those. Got some jobs doing that, and then as the drag and drop websites came more into being, I created them for different things. And now I use Show It as my platform, which I really like. It interacts with WordPress for the blog, et cetera, et cetera. But it's just something that it's one of those things where I can get into it and time disappears. Like I'll spend all day designing a website and I don't even know, like it's 3 o'clock and I haven't eaten yet, and things like that. I just love doing it. And I was about 3, 4 years ago, and I was like, I really want to do my own thing, you know. And I kind of started out with like operations manager because I'm really good at that part of it too, setting up all the systems and things that people need in their small business. But I still had website design as a service. And then that kind of you know, I did I think one or two. And then I just was like, you know what? I don't want to do that because I have to do it for my own business, all the operations management. I want to do the fun thing. I want to do the website design. And so, I completely changed that and got my first client. And then she's referred me to a few other clients, all of whom happen to be authors. And I was like, you know what? I think that's my niche. I've always loved to read. I may or may not write a book yet. I don't know. I've got a couple ideas. Um, but it was something that as a child I thought that I was going to be. You know, I had these fantastical, overly romanticized dreams of being a writer and, you know, being in France and, you know, all of the things, thinking that that's how it really worked. Now, of course, today it's drastically different in the publishing industry and everything, but I just love doing websites. I like the creativity of it. It's somewhere, it's a space where I get to be completely free. Um, and I have that organized mind to be able to lay out the website properly because, you know, sometimes you get on websites and you're like, where am I going? Now, I think we've come a little longer way forward, so that's usually not as big of a problem. But I also have an SEO certification as well so that I can make sure that your website can actually get found online, which is a huge issue, especially today with the AI generated responses and the paid ads on the search engines. So it's very more important than ever that your website is set up and properly search engine optimized. So I do have that knowledge as well. But I think for me, it's just that creativity that kind of got stifled in me and was never really pushed. You know, it's not like I didn't try to share those dreams or those things with my mom, but she just didn't care. And so, you know, everything was made to be like, what does this matter? You know, you're insignificant anyway. So you just kind of let things go by the wayside. Thankfully, I was able to rediscover it, you know, later that I am a creative and I enjoy it and it's what I'm good at.
Yeah, 100%. Well, I love that what I really loved about what you just shared is how healing it seems to be for you. How it's just kind of this creative space where you can go and you can create and you can just be free. And I love that for you.
Thank you.
One of my favorite sayings, and this is a question I ask all of my guests at the end. One of my favorite sayings is, I never lose. I win or I learn. So, looking back on your journey, what has been one of your biggest learning moments? And what would you like to pass along to our listeners from that experience?
I had a professor once who was talking about um, like feeling stuck and being in a rut, and he called it the velvet rut. That, you know, you knew things had to change, but it's just so comfortable here because it is hard to change. And I remember that that really kind of has stuck with me all these years because I've done a lot of changing. You know, I had to make big changes in deciding, you know, to not communicate with my mother anymore. To get a divorce was a big one. To decide to, you know, be a better parent to my son and to just, you know, it's going to suck. There were days, you know, when my ex was still doing his visitation, he'd take my son on Sundays. I can't tell you how many Sundays I sat and cried for 2 hours. Then I cleaned up my face and got myself together because I had homework or a test that week or whatever, and my son was going to be coming home, and just got it all back together and did it again. And, you know, change is not comfortable, but it is always, I think, necessary, especially when you're looking at what can I do to improve my life or those of the loved ones around me. So don't stay in your velvet rut. Get out of it, no matter how comfortable it feels.
Ginger, thank you so much for sharing your story and your insights with us today. Your journey is a powerful reminder that we are not our pasts and we have the power to shape our futures no matter where we started. Listeners, if today's episode spoke to you, please take a moment to follow and share Taboo Talks. When you share, you're helping spread these conversations to more people who might need to hear them. And together, we're building a community that supports each other through our shared stories. And Ginger, I know you have a special offer for our listeners. Could you tell us a little bit about what that is and how they can connect with you?
So I have a Show It website template that is completely customizable. You even get links to the resources that you need to be able to customize it yourself, or you can have me customize it for a special rate. You can find it at gingerhilton.com/freebie, FREEBIE, and it is primarily made for authors, but because it is customizable, it can be for any service provider out there. It is a one-page template that has your about and services and book sections right in all in one page with links and some graphics that you can reuse, and hope that you check it out.
Awesome. Thank you. Mamas, if you're looking for an easy to use template, make sure you check in with Ginger and connect with her online to learn more about her and what she does. All right, that's all we have for today. Remember, you are stronger than you think. You're never alone, and you're doing the work not just for yourself, but for your kids. Keep breaking those cycles, keep showing up for yourself, and I'll see you back here next week. Woo! Take a breath, because this isn't just about pushing through or keeping your head down. This is a season of stepping up, of making moves. And the move is breaking the pattern, choosing differently, learning to trust yourself enough to stop, recalibrate, and move with intention. Breaking cycles, not just for you, but for the generations that come after you. If this episode resonated, please send it to someone who needs it, because real conversations deserve to be heard. And if you enjoyed today's episode, I'd love for you to leave a review on Apple or Spotify. It helps us reach more people who are ready to step it up. Listen, if you're not just here to survive, but to build something real, whether it's in your life, your leadership, or your business, let's connect. Whether you want to work with me, book me as a speaker, or learn how to build a brand that actually aligns with your purpose, head over to krystalcasey.com/links. Everything you need is there. And remember, you were never meant to just keep going. You were meant to break the cycle, build something real, and reclaim your power. Keep leading, keep creating, and I'll see you back here next Tuesday.